Brilliant. Okay, so thank you very much indeed to everybody for joining us this evening. It's a beautiful, beautiful evening, so it's even more dedication to come and listen to a webinar as well this tonight as well. So we're doing a sort of series of webinars, and Wendy has helped us organise them right into 2023 now. So hopefully a really good sort of exchange of information about various different topics that will all help on that path to net zero and sustainable agriculture. So for tonight, I'm just sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. So those of you that don't know me, I'm Sophie Throop and I look after agriculture at Morrison's. So I would really like to hand over now to George and Louise, and thank you so much to both of you for coming along to speak with us tonight. Obviously, one of the really important parts that we need to get right to think about that road to net zero and sustainable farming is how it's going to get paid for. There's certainly lots of things that we're doing to look at lowering emissions, which also is about increasing profitability, but there are also lots of really helpful grant funding schemes that are available. But they're not always that easy to find out where they are. So hopefully by the end of this session, George and Louise might have just given us a bit of insight, and then we'll welcome any discussion from anybody after the call. We'll probably stop the recording after George and Louise have done their bit, so we can just have an open discussion without that being recorded. But for now, I'll just say thank you very much and hand over to the two of you.
Thank you, Sophie. And I will do an introduction of Louise. I think is going to do most of the speaking, although we thought we would go for a bit of a Farmers Weekly podcast style conversation, whereby you're not just listening to one person, but actually a bit of to and fro, and keep it conversational as well. So Louise and I are both farming consultants. We're both based out of our Oxford office. So CERES Rural is a relatively new company offering farm consultancy services. We only operate in England primarily, but do some work in Wales, limited work in Scotland, but we have deliberately tried to make this applicable to initially the brief was the sheep sector, but I understand we have people from every sector, so we hence the opening slide, but we are trying to keep it applicable to most sectors, and also relevant to Wales and Scotland as well. But I appreciate there is an awful lot to cover in half an hour of speaking, and then time for questions afterwards. So without further ado, Louise, starting off, if I can get the next slide to go. Frozen. There we go. Louise, over to you. Background.
Yes. Background. So a big reason that I guess a lot of you are probably on this call is the fact that if you're living in England, and in fact if you're living in Wales or Scotland, BPS payments are being phased out. For England, they will be phased out and they'll be gone by 2028. So this is an example for a 282 hectare farm, which might be a bit bigger or smaller than some of you guys, of how the payments are going to be phased down. So from 100% in 2020 to 0 in 2028.
Yeah, so nothing particularly new, I hope, to most of you there, but sets the scene. And there is, of course, lump sum exit available, and worth noting at this point about the delinking of payments in England to be aware of. If you are taking on new land this year in 2020 to first claim in 2023, that you won't have that reference period available. So the 2024 to 2027 payments may not be available to you. So something to be aware of if taking on new land this autumn.
Oh dear.
And then carrying on in terms of background, so DEFRA's sort of direction of travel, as you'll all be aware, is clearly towards environmental and public money for public goods. But it was interesting to note Victoria Prentice saying just a couple of weeks ago that farmers are going to have to start to learn to live with uncertainty. And I think this was one of the first times we actually heard that spelled out. A lot of speaking to farmers, a lot of the perception was, oh, well, when we know what is going to happen with elms, we'll have a bit more clarity as to what the payment system is going to be. Well, my opinion and overview is we are starting to see that happen now. And now it is ministers are starting to make, I think, a few intentions a bit clearer that the BPS elms is not going to be the replacement of BPS, but there will still be some useful funding to be obtained. Louise, anything to add?
I don't think so. It's just the purpose of this is for you guys is being aware of what is coming and trying to know what is available so you can replace that money that's going out of your business and future-proof it going forward.
So looking at some of the numbers, and again, this is largely England-based, but it still gives a good impression. And of course, that BPS reduction hits the larger farmers more. It's worth making that point that there are, if you're in the under £30,000 bracket, your reductions, and hopefully you've had money in the bank account this week or the week before, are going to be felt to a lesser extent. But the government is planning on saving in the region of 1 billion through these reductions, and then putting that money into predominantly environmental and animal welfare outcomes, and outcomes that they call improving farm prosperity. But you can see that by 2024-25, the aim is that the vast majority of the funding is going through into environmental and animal welfare outcomes.
Yeah, so I think it's important now to, get to know what the schemes are coming. We're going to talk about them in more detail, just so you're familiar with what they are, and those payments, hopefully with those schemes, will increase over time. So if you can get to know them now, then you'll be in a good position going forward.
It's all about trying to maximise as much of that 1 billion excess money in these other schemes, and getting as much of that into your farm bank account as possible, really.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So how does that look? This is a sort of diagram we've tried to summarise again for England primarily, and on the left hand side there are the 3 tiers of the environmental land management scheme, which you would have heard a good deal about. On the far right hand side are the other environmental and animal welfare schemes. So this is where countryside stewardship, the current scheme, sits, but also some of the new ones like farming in protected landscapes, and this is where tree planting falls in as well. Probably the lesser known schemes coming up are the farm prosperity ones, and the most common of that, or most known, is probably the farming investment fund, which is split into what I call the farming equipment fund, which is sort of like the small grants, and the farming transformation fund, which is sort of like the large grants, which we'll summarise a bit more detail on. But also in here is where the farm resilience fund fits, and that is about where you can get free advice, and also things like new entrant support and slurry investment scheme. So there are lots of new words in here, and again, there's a copy of these slides will be circulated, but it's just quite useful to see how all of these different schemes fit together and where the money is going to be flowing from. In terms of timescales, the key thing to note here is that we are in the middle of 2022 when many of these things are just starting. They are set to run on, most of them, through 23 and 24, but the key thing to note here is that DEFRA have been quite slow at hitting a lot of these targets. So for example, the sustainable farming incentive was supposed to be up and running a few months ago. It's only just come out in full phase last month, so deadlines are slightly slipping from DEFRA's point of view. But we are very much at the beginning of this transition phase, and hence why a lot of these new schemes are in their infancy, but are set to be carrying on.
So countryside stewardship, there might be a few of you that have existing countryside stewardship schemes. So some of you, next year is the last year that the final year of application, if you want to enter in. So this is your AB15s, your AB9s, your AB8s, a lot of people are in these schemes. It's a good idea. A lot of people are entering into these schemes because the payment rates are there. They've just recently updated a lot of the payment rates for a lot of the schemes, and this will help bridge the gap whilst that pot of BPS dwindles, and there's more money flowing into these newer schemes coming forward. It is a good idea to consider going into one of these schemes, and you can exit these schemes when if a new scheme's out and you think, actually, you know what, I want to go into that, then you will be able to end your CSS schemes early.
Yeah, and it's worth noting as well that now that we are governed by UK regulations rather than EU, they have said that inspections should be more outcome focused and proportionate. So, for instance, if an inspector comes and walks on your farm and says, yeah, that looks like you're achieving what you need to achieve, they'll just put a tick in the box, rather than want to trawl through reams and reams of paperwork to count every last seed invoice or stocking number. So we are looking forward to that starting to filter down to farm level. But yes, as Louise said, a countryside stewardship is quite a flexible offer at the moment, and it's sort of it's taking the bird in the hand that we know, rather than waiting for perhaps something that's still a little bit unknown. So next year is the last chance if you're not already in.
And you can, under your countryside stewardship, you can get capital grants of a maximum, I think it's 120 grand. So if you want to do capital on a big scale, then it's definitely worth doing that under countryside stewardship next year if you don't already have some plans in place. If you've already got some, or you want to do some more, then you can also do standalone capital grants. These are under 3 different titles. You've got boundaries, trees and orchards, water quality and air quality, and these are all up to a maximum of 20 grand each. And this is a rolling application window, so you can do it whenever you'd like, but if there are some options, particularly under the water quality, that will involve getting a catchment sensitive officer out. So if you want to do some of these options, then you need to be thinking about that now.
Yeah, exactly. So it is worth saying that payment rates on capital items haven't increased the same way they increased some of the annual options, which is unfortunate because, as you all know, the cost of fencing has gone through the roof. But it is still a useful contribution if these sorts of works are needed on your farm. And particularly having opened up the catchment sensitive approvals to medium priority areas, it's worth a quick look on Magic Map, because previously you might have thought, oh, I'm not in the high priority area for water. But now if you are in a medium priority area, you can still get that advice from your catchment sensitive farming officer, and it may be able to, they can fund concrete yard renewal, or rainwater harvesting tanks, or the livestock and machinery hardcore tracks. Those are really some of the popular ones if you're in even a medium priority area now, worth getting that catchment sensitive farming advice on.
Now moving on to sustainable farming incentive. A lot of you probably have heard of this. There's been a lot of talk. So first, starting with the arable soil standard, you've got 2 levels, introductory and intermediate. This has a number of requirements such as testing soil organic matter and doing multi-species crops on 20% of the area if you want to go for the immediate standard. For a lot of people, if you're already putting cover crops in and you're already doing a lot of soil testing, then it's a bit of a no-brainer and you'll easily be able to adopt it and get the payment. For some of you, it might alter what you're doing. You might need to think a bit more about whether you're going to enter into it. But the introductory standard is very, very easy to do, and the application process, me and George did one the other day, and it is fairly straightforward. But if you are in an existing countryside stewardship scheme, then you do need to email the RPA in order to be able to go online and make that SFI application, which is currently now open.
Yeah, there's been some negative press in the Farmers Weekly on this, and people saying, oh, it's not worth the payment rates. But actually, when you break down the changes you may or may not need to make to your current operating structure, it is just worth that costing out the difference, because in some cases, for instance, if you are growing spring crops and are happy to put a cover crop in before, or if you're growing oilseed rape, possibly not in the current drought, but putting a companion crop in, for example, can help tick one of the boxes for the multi-species cover. So there are ways of growing crops and ticking the boxes for sustainable farming incentive arable soil.
Then the other standard is the improved grassland soils. This has similar requirements to the arable soil standard, and it is similar to me and George spoke about earlier, that actually potentially you might be better going into GS4 for countryside stewardship.
Yeah, the payment rates seem quite comparable if you are looking for to put herbal lays on some of your temporary grass. It may be part of a sensible fertilizer strategy for next year anyway, with input costs where they are, that a bit more of a clover rich herbal lay might be a useful forage source, and it's just worth costing up whether it's better to do that under the sustainable farming incentive or better under countryside stewardship. There are pros and cons of both. The main pro of sustainable farming incentive being that it's easier to apply, guaranteed to get in, and you can do it on a short-term basis, so even if you only have a rolling year-to-year agreement, whereas countryside stewardship requires generally 5 years or landlord's counter-signature.
So moving forward, there's going to be more standards coming. These aren't set in stone about when they're going to come out. They might bring a few forward, put a few backwards, depending on what's going on at DEFRA, I suppose. But next year, we would look to see the end of this year, nutrient management standard, integrated pest management standard, hedgerow standards, and there's also going to be the arable soil standard that we talked about on the previous slide. They're going to bring out an advanced level to that, where you'll see an additional payment for doing a few additional actions. And then going further into the future, there's going to be more looking at potentially 2025 bringing on an organic standard, dry stone walls. If any of you are from Wales, there's a lot of dry stone walls there. But yeah, these will be phased in, and they're still working on these. So it'll be interesting to see what the payment rates are on these and what the opportunities are.
Yeah, there's still a lot of unknown on this, and it feels like countryside stewardship is going to be largely merged into these sorts of different standards, which are supposed to be easier to apply. But unfortunately, what DEFRA don't realise is that any change still requires a lot of time to get your head around what it all means. And we still don't have much detail on these, so it is quite frustrating. But that said, I do think the industry does need to be using these and applying for sustainable farming incentive standards, for the main reason that it will help secure that funding in the rural community. I worry otherwise that policymakers might say, if you're not using it, we'll take it away and apply these funds, perhaps elsewhere in a different department. So moving on.
Yeah, the Farming Investment Fund. So this is made up of a number of different parts, starting with the Farming Equipment and Technology Fund. So this is kind of smaller size grants ranging from 2,000 to 25,000. This is currently closed, but it's reopening this autumn. And this is a really great opportunity at home. We've just got a new mobile sheep handling system, which has upgraded our current one, which is a big benefit because we run a lot of sheep. But it's a really good opportunity to upgrade your current systems and equipment on the farm.
Yeah, there have been issues over supply, so many of you might have already engaged with this. So you do need to be pretty organised in finding a supplier that can do it on time. And it is, of course, only designed to be a 40% grant. So you do still generally need to contribute 60%. So worth bearing that in mind. A nice to have if you need one of these items, and we eagerly await its reopening and seeing what is on the list. But we expect it to be similar to the last round, where I think certainly handling systems, and also for arable farms, the 6-metre direct drill grant for 25,000 towards drill able to plant into cover crops was certainly very popular.
Yeah, I think it's important to start having these conversations around the dinner table now about what kind of things you might be looking to invest in, because if when it reopens, then you can get on it straight away and try and avoid any of those supply issues.
The farming transformation fund side of the farming investment fund has generally been this part of larger type grants. Again, 3 themes of water management, improving farm productivity, and adding value. Unfortunately, all 3 of those at the moment are closed. Again, DEFRA are quite good at opening these windows and closing them again. But as I showed on the timeline before, we are expecting them to reopen again. And some examples that we have done on water management have been applications for reservoirs. On the improving farm productivity, there's been a lot of robotic milker applications, and again, these are 40% grant towards robotic milking machines, but other robotic equipment is available as well. But these applications are judged on value for money, and they are quite farm specific. But 40% and a minimum cost of 80,000 up to 1.2 million. So if you are planning some form of major infrastructure change, then worth looking into. And similarly, the adding value theme, again, recently just closed, but we hope set to open again within the next year. And this is really looking at adding value onto farms, so that increasing your primary products. So whether that is investing in sort of meat handling and processing things on farms to be able to supply directly into your own farm shop, or even for on arable farms, grain handling and cleaning equipment has been qualified. So quite a wide range of options available here, but again, 40% grant towards a project, and so again, it's rather than trying to fit the grant into something, it's trying to think of projects you may have had or been planning to do anyway, and then getting grant funding for those, because these aren't straightforward applications generally. They do require quite a bit of paperwork.
Yeah, and there's more information about these on the DEFRA website. So if this is something that you're interested in, it's definitely worth reading up now. And then when the application window reopens, then you can get in and start your application.
Farming in protected landscapes. So that's areas of outstanding natural beauty and national parks. This is now a new rolling application window of grants, and we've submitted a number. They are looking for projects that support climate, nature, people, and place. So this could be something about a specific nature project on your farm, or something that helps improve education on your farm, or we've done one that involves sort of tree planting and changing a farming system around that. Depending on whether it's going to be a profit-making enterprise, the grants are between 40 and 100%. And as I say, it is a rolling application window, but limited to strictly those only in areas of outstanding natural beauty or national parks. So if you are in one of those and planning a project on the horizon, it is definitely worth a conversation with the local landscape officer to see if there might be funding available.
Then we have the Future Farming Resilience Fund. So they've just recently closed the last part of this, but the new scale up phase is coming, and that will be starting in October. So basically this is where DEFRA is funding free farm business reviews from local advisors. So this will enable farm business to navigate the changes during the agricultural transition and thrive post BPS. We as an organisation, we have been doing some of these reviews, putting together reports, and it's really good for farmers just to have a fresh set of eyes over their farm. We're doing this along with lots of other organisations. This is just England, but if your farm does straddle the border with Wales and Scotland, and you have land in England, then you are eligible for one of these Future Farm Resilience Fund reviews.
Yeah, so there's 17 providers. We're just one of them, so worth having a look through the list, and definitely it's an opportunity for someone local to come and visit your farm and really give you a breakdown of thrash through all of this confusing grant jargon and work out which ones are applicable to your farm. So the Local Nature Recovery Fund, we're sort of moving on now into ones that aren't necessarily we're able to grasp straight away, but are more shortly coming on the horizon. And so of ELMS, there's the Sustainable Farming Incentive, and then this is the middle tier, I suppose, which is Local Nature Recovery Fund. And this is sort of going to be like a replacement to HLS, so designed to be quite specific local priorities. And it's still in its pilot phase at the moment, expecting to be rolled out next year. But again, I would be viewing it as countryside stewardship is going to be sort of splitting into the sort of lower mid tier is going to be SFI, and this is going to be the sort of mid to higher tier local specific type of projects. And then the landscape recovery is the sort of the super high tier of ELMS, and this actually was in the news a couple of weeks ago because DEFRA have just decided to cut down the funding from down to only 50 million. It was supposed to have a third of the funding, and it's now only going to have about 2%. And this is sort of was branded the sort of rewilding type funding because it was trying to bring landscape change together, again in its pilot phase at the moment. But if you are along a sort of a river catchment, and you may be able to benefit from this sort of project by collaborating with neighbours and working together to sort of bring about a sort of landscape change. But it's sort of moved slightly down the agenda by DEFRA, wanting to focus on more of the more easily obtained farmer grants, which we support really. This was looking like a lot of funding that may not be available to the sort of most farmers.
Yeah, so farmers can, and going back on that, farmers can enter into a number of those schemes as long as you're not double claiming. You can do a combination of them all. Then moving on to animals, we've got the animal health and welfare pathway. So this comes under the new ELM schemes. This is part of the Sustainable Farming Incentive. So this is launching this year, and it will be available to farmers in England who have over a certain amount of animals, for example, more than 20 sheep. And if you're currently eligible for BAPS, then you'll be eligible for the animal health and welfare pathway. It will basically fund a yearly visit for their own vet for up to 3 years. And the vet will come and do a review, and there's payment rates, for example, £436 per review for sheep. And this is trying to highlight particular diseases that are issues for each livestock, and they will then come and implement certain management changes that you can make to try and eradicate and better manage your livestock moving forward.
So not big sums of money, but welcome nonetheless.
There will also be capital grants available. So there'll be small grants, so a bit like for the arable, there'll be smaller and large grants. The large grants are quite exciting. There's potentially grants for new housing, building upgrades, and pasture improvements, so over £30,000. So if you have livestock, then that's pretty significant to be able to get funding on those type of things.
And that's coming next year and the year after.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then we've got disease eradication control programs to help and prevent and reduce priority diseases. And lastly, payment by results. So this will be coming between 2023 and 2024. There'll be the first ongoing payment schemes launched, including payments by results pilots. And then between 2025 and 2026, there'll be these schemes will be rolled out. We're not quite sure what they're going to look like yet, but we think that it will reward farmers who demonstrate high health and welfare outcomes in their herds and flocks. So I think it's going forward important to make sure that you're thinking about these and putting steps in place to future-proof yourself.
Yep.
The slurry investment scheme, this is the first time that they have ran slurry storage grants in many years, so they're expecting that demand is going to be very high. In the first round, if they get more applications and they're able to fund, they're going to prioritize applications that will have the highest environmental benefit. If you're thinking of doing something on quite a big scale for the slurry, then it's definitely worth preparing now, thinking about what storage capacity you're going to need, what sort of store you might build, choosing where you might put it, and checking if you need to apply for planning permission. But this fund is going to fund for new stores, impermeable covers, and replacing existing stores, building additional storage. So the funding is between 25 to 250,000. So there's a lot of money there if investing in your slurry storage is something that you need to do on your farm.
And this is they're really wanting to get farms to 6 months slurry storage. That's the big aim of this project. And yes, opening shortly. This in the next month or two. So other funding available that we haven't talked about that was on the diagram. There is for those with significant areas of woodland, a tree health scheme that is being piloted at the moment, not dissimilar to some of the existing tree health grants available. So for instance, if you have a lot of diseased ash, then being able to fell that and grant towards restocking, so useful. And also woodland planting and creation. So lots of talk about English woodland creation offer, paying up to just under £10,000 a hectare for planting, with a minimum area of 1 hectare. In my experience, this nearly covers the cost of tree planting. So at the moment, it doesn't. My personal opinion is, if you are wanting to plant trees for a certain reason, it's useful to have that paid for. In itself, it isn't at the moment a sort of money-making exercise, because you are taking land out of production for tree planting. There is the availability to auction the credits under the government scheme, so that can provide a sort of a useful additional income. But again, my gut feeling is, if you're wanting to plant trees, it's not an incentive that's necessarily going to disappear, so not necessarily one to jump into immediately.
Now moving on to any farmers that we have in Scotland. So BPS is guaranteed to be in place until 2024. Their current, what would be England's countryside stewardship scheme, is the Agri-Environment Climate Scheme. And this has been extended, and there will be an annual application round until 2024, so a year longer than CSS. And this is very similar. They've got your management options, which are annual payments. You have arable options, grassland options, upland, peatland and moorland options. managing water quality and flood risk options, which you get paid for annually. There's also capital items, so similar to some of the ones that we have available, such as slurry storage. So it's if you live in Scotland, then it's making sure that you're entering into these schemes now, because moving on to the next slide, Scotland, they haven't currently. Our ELMS is England's new scheme, but in terms of Scotland, they actually haven't announced yet their new agricultural support framework, and they're hoping to put this in place by 2026, but they haven't actually announced anything in concrete. But in the time being, they've got the National Test Programme. This has two areas. It's got the preparing for sustainable farming, so this is bridging the gap between the current AECS schemes and the new ones that are yet to be announced. This is currently live and funds farmers to conduct carbon audits, undertake soil sampling, and improve nutrient management planning. And then it's got a second part to it, which is focusing on tools, support and processes that will be required to measure performance in achieving environmental goals. So very similar to the ELMS, it's focused on the environment, it's focusing on carbon and improving air and water quality. And hopefully the new scheme will be announced shortly. Then moving on to Wales. So Wales is going to have BPS until at least 2023, and their current schemes that they have in place is growing for the environment. The autumn one is closed, but you can still apply for the spring sown crops. In terms of their grants, the environment small grants is still open, as well as the nutrient management investment. So this is a flexible framework of support, and schemes will be delivered as well as around woodland forestry, food and farming supply chains, and on-farm efficiency and diversification. So this is quite simple actually. So they have the new sustainable farming scheme that is coming forward, which will start in 2025. So they have a prepare and pilot phase, a bit like we do within ELMS, a transition period between 2025 and 2029. So this is made up of universal actions. So these actions that must be carried out by all farmers that join the scheme. There will be some flexibility and some exemptions, such as if you can't carry out the action due to topography or land type. There will be optional actions. These will be targeted to specific land or landscape features. Then there will be collaborative actions. So these are a bit larger scale and will involve multiple farmers coming together to achieve the same benefit across the farming landscape. So an example of this would be minimising the risk of catching and spreading disease. So if you go onto the document that Wales has produced under the new sustainable farming scheme, you'll see they've got a number of goals that they're trying to work towards. And then as you can see, you've got the U in the blue box. So these are the universal actions that anyone in the scheme will need to do. O is the optional actions, such as having a 3-metre wide fence and hedge along the farm boundary. And then the C is the collaborative options that people can do collaboratively across the industry. They also have Farming Connect, which is a system that they're putting in place to roll out across the whole of Wales, which will basically provide support on how to do this across the industry. And give you advice which you can be easily accessible.
Good. So to sort of finish off, really, that's been a lot of public funding. There is, of course, private funding growing as an emerging market, and some of these names you will be starting to hear, things like Soil Capital, Cool Farm Alliance for doing carbon auditing, or Greener, amongst many others. And really, you will have had other talks about carbon, so I don't need to duplicate that, but really saying that the government are interested in this concept of sort of hybrid funding, and I think this is not necessarily going to disappear. Clearly, if they can start getting private sources of funding rather than just relying on public sources, that excites policy thinkers, and so things like a carbon audit, even just a baseline assessment of where your current position is a useful thing to do at the moment. Even if you choose to do nothing with that, there will likely be opportunities to monetize a future change in your system and try and get some cash into the bank for those actions. At the moment, for an arable farm, they're typically in the region of sort of £30 to £60 a hectare for a change in action. So not dissimilar to the sustainable farming incentive, but this is definitely going to be a space to watch. And secondarily, biodiversity net gain is a growing market. So again, this is taking funding from local development and applying that into rural farms. The downside of these, they tend to be 30-year contracts, so not the most straightforward things, but there will be a growing opportunity to take money for creation of new habitats, and this is a rapidly growing market. So, in summary, give ourselves a bit of time for questions. Pulling this all together, I think it is a good time now to be assessing what the impact of the loss of BPS is on your business. I think governments are expecting farmers to adapt, and that is now becoming a bit clearer that there isn't going to be a replacement for this. And so it is a case of looking at all of these grants, but also looking at other opportunities within the business to try and make changes that are going to recoup BPS. We don't know a great deal about some of the sections of ELMS. We know a reasonable amount about other sections. And my view is that it is still the right decision to be looking at some of the known quantities, such as countryside stewardship in England, in the first instance, before some of these others get up and running and give you 5 years of secure funding. Louise.
England, so England, ELMS and Wales is largely at trial, so there's still more unknown, and Scotland is yet to announce its future policy. So yeah, the existing schemes that are available in Wales and Scotland, I'd say the same that George just said. If there's funding that's still available, and you know these schemes, then it's definitely important to make sure that you're having that income still coming into the business whilst you can. And then lastly, looking for specific capital or project funding that fits your plans rather than chasing grants that may not be applicable. Looking at your business now, seeing what grants are out there, whether it's the slurry investment scheme, whether it's productivity grants, whether it's the farming transformation fund, and getting more equipment and investing in technology, whether that's in your countryside stewardship, getting more fencing, and in hedge gapping up, planting new hedges. Whilst the funding is there, I think it's important that you jump on that funding now and get those things done, because we don't necessarily know with the new schemes whether that specific funding for that specific thing will be available. So it's definitely important to look into that now whilst it's still available.
Yeah, and lastly, make use of the farm resilience funds to find a local provider that can sort of help do a bit of one-to-one advice on making a bit more sense of all of this.
Yeah, they'll pretty much be able to talk about everything we've talked about today, but make it specific to your farm, where you are in the country, what type of land you've got, and what would fit your farming system moving forward.
Questions?
Oh, thank you very much indeed, George and Louise. I think that's so helpful, and also just goes to illustrate how much there is there, but you do have to have quite a full-time job in navigating it all and trying to sort of work out what would be relevant. So yeah, I'd really welcome anybody who has any questions to come forward with that. But let's pause the recording.